I'm like working on a book right now.
You heard it here first on the Rich Dawn.
Now I have to do it.
Yeah.
I've mentioned it. we can edit that out, right? We can snip that. But that's a fence I want to...
Salute. Welcome to a special edition of the Rich Dawn, where eternal beatitude begins in this life. I'm Kyle Dean, and today I have with me a four-man panel, returning members of the Rich Dawn. To my immediate right, I have Dennis G., fellow co-founder of the East to West Theology YouTube channel, and as seen on episode 12 of the Rich Dawn. And to his right, we have Brady Webb, who is featured on episode 5 of the Rich Dawn. He is our resident Chestertonian and Catechist. And to my left, we have Francis Boeck from episode 9, who is our journalist and lifelong member of parish ministry. Gentlemen, how are y'all today? In no particular order.
There's a Bills game later that we're hoping goes well, so we'll find out in the future.
Oh, absolutely. Bills Chiefs. By the time this comes out, fate will have been struck.
Right.
Right? I want to say third time's a charm.
Yes.
You know?
I think the last time I watched it was with you and Kyle.
Yes, that was a night.
It was intense. Always on my
14 seconds,
weekend.
right?
Oh, brutal.
Lord have mercy.
Yeah, we lost to a coin, right? And today's topic is cringy things that happen in the life of the church and solutions. So we thought this would be this is going to be a jovial, light, fun, panel discussion, but also value adding because, before we start, I just want to set the tone by saying, we've got a quote that I found in my life that comes up constantly. It's so relevant in so many different situations. You'll have someone that's gossiping. Maybe they don't understand the severity of sins of the tongue. Maybe it's due to just whatever it is. You've got everyone's got those friends that only want to talk weather and sports. Like there's way more going on than just that.
Why did you point at me?
No, really,
I'm the least qualified.
Come on, man.
Because our brother, he's not as into the Bills as the rest of us, but that's neither here nor there. But the quote is small minds talk about people, average minds talk about events, and great minds talk about ideas. It's by Eleanor Roosevelt, great first lady. And it really kind of sets the tone for what we're hoping to accomplish here, right? We want to have fun. We want to be light, but we also want to be cognizant of the fact that everyone here is a removed grace away from doing any of the things that we're going to talk about that could be cringy, right?
Or even worse.
Yeah, or worse. And so it's kind of a necessary thing to perhaps talk about circumstances that involve people or even events. But it's in getting to that solution that we bring those ideas. And, when you really kind of stay in the ideal realm, you can kind of it's a lot easier to avoid those sins of the tongue. You know what I mean? So with that, setting the tone, who wants to go first? What just, gets your goat that goes on in the life of church that people can hopefully maybe relate to?
I guess I just have a starting question as far as what's cringy. So what do we mean by cringy?
I love that. Let's define our terms. Yeah. What does it mean to you?
I asked you guys.
Well, let's kick it to Dennis G. One thing I didn't mention in the qualifying intro, of course, it's inferred with East to West theology. Dennis is our resident Eastern Catholic. So I don't know whether there's is there a definitively Eastern definition to cringe? Or is it more of a universal
as opposed to a Western version?
Yeah.
I think I would pin that back to the rich dawn because the sun rises in the east.
Yes, indeed.
But no, of course, I think that cringy would just be something.
Wait, the rich dawn's not cringe, is it?
Well, I mean,
that's what we're here to find out.
Oh, I love that.
I can't really.
I'm in the hot seat. I like this.
I can't really give a good definition of it. Besides, it's that feeling that everyone knows where if something happens that they deem to be inappropriate or embarrassing in the moment, that they would have the feeling of cringe, such as being in a situation where you're in high school and all of a sudden your mom shows up and hands you a lunch, and says, I love you, gives you a kiss and all, it's a little bit cringy, I guess,
Well, nowadays, I mean, some people, well, that's another story for another day, but
yeah.
I think Francis is saying what's in the lunchbox. Yeah. You know what I mean?
I mean, there's plenty of examples. I'm sure you guys can share some others, but to me, it's more of an experience, right? I don't have the exact definition. Brady,
well, do we need to, or maybe we get into this as we go on, the difference between a cringe versus a preference? I mean, you might prefer things one way, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. Where cringe, we actually think this might actually be wrong.
That's a really good point, because I think a working definition could go either way, but for the purposes of what we're doing here, as we stated, right, we're more focusing on things that are objectively a concern. Either there's like a liturgical abuse at work that many people maybe don't know at a given parish, or there's something that's going against a virtue, which ultimately all wraps, into charity at the end of the day. So yeah, that's a good point. Like, cringe could just mean it's kind of subjective, right? But for the purposes of defining our terms here, that's what it means for us. So Brady, I think that was good to kick it off that way. So with that, what's cringe to us?
Oh, man.
Well, I think I gave the example of your mother coming to greet you, and maybe if you're at maybe you play football in high school, and your mother comes up to you and says, "Oh, I love you, honey," gives you a big kiss, and I don't know, just embarrassing for me when I was in high school.
It would be embarrassing, and I think you can also say that there's like a level of inappropriateness. Like, first of all, the high schooler should know to bring his own lunch, be responsible.
Exactly,
for that.
yeah.
And two, mom should know, like, this is not how we act especially in front of peers, how they might take that, and you have to be cognizant of that. Even if you don't care, other people might care, they might care.
Yep.
And
I think that's a big part of cringe nature, or how, I don't know the terms, we can branch off with cringe, but
cringeology.
Yeah. Okay. But that sometimes it's like the presence of mind to know this is a good way to act or a not good way to act, and so you have to have self-possession to the degree that you know where you are, you know what context you're in, and you know what should be done or said or acted upon. And if you step out of line with that, that's when somebody else who does know, cringe is like in the eye of the cringe beholder, kind of. Like, it's the person who knows this is how you should act, or this is what is expected or acceptable, and then you watch someone just actively do something against that, and you're like, ew. And that's the cringe.
Maybe it's like someone that you find to be most esteemed, right? Maybe like a professor or someone of a high status, and then they just try to just make this joke that just doesn't land, right? Like just like a bad joke, and it makes them look.
Or you see someone acting not their age, and they're trying to.
Oh yeah.
They're an adult acting like a teenager, and it makes you a little uncomfortable. Like, this isn't age appropriate. That's not. We shouldn't be doing that.
Exactly. Yeah, great example, Francis. Yeah.
Yes. Spoken like true cringeologists. So let's kick it in the context of church life, right? I'll kick it off. I'll be the trailblazer. So low hanging fruit, right? Clapping after the closing hymn in Mass. I don't know if anybody here has experienced that before, but from my understanding, while it's not a liturgical abuse per se, because it's actually the liturgy's over as of the recessional hymn happening, it's still considered inappropriate, objectively speaking, because of the fact that that's sacred music. That's not a performance, right? When you're concluding the holy sacrifice of the Mass, which is a very solemn event, it's not really about the choir or the organist or whatever the instruments are that are there. That could be its own subtopic of what any of us might that might fall at the preference level, but just that in and of itself, because I've seen many times in you visit a parish, right? You never know what you're going to get whenever you happen to be out of town, right? Has anybody here ever just traveled somewhere and seen something?
I travel.
That you couldn't unsee.
Yeah.
I haven't seen anything bad, but I did accidentally fall into a Latin Mass recently. And when I was in Syracuse, that was kind of interesting.
Okay.
Was there some cringe?
Yeah, it was a good one. It was just like, I didn't realize until 5 minutes before. I'm like, oh, this is happening. This is interesting.
It usually doesn't take too long to recognize that there's something different, right?
Oh yeah.
Starting with language.
Well, no, it was like, I noticed like the altar was like way up against the wall. I'm like, I don't think the priest is going to be able to get back there. I was like, oh, this must be a Latin Mass.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
How many Latin masses have you been to previously?
Just one. It was actually for Kyle Dean's son's baptism.
Oh, no kidding. Okay, wow.
Indeed.
Nice. Well,
yeah, I'm an avid Latin Master. That's one, for anybody that knows, my channel with any regularity or our channel.
I was going to mention that in the Eastern Church as well, Eastern liturgies, that it's just like the Latin Mass where the altar's, totally connected with the
wall or
the tabernacle. Yeah. Well, it's a little bit different in the East. There's actually an entire area you can walk around behind the altar as well, which is interesting. But the tabernacle is right in the center, right? So you'd have to get a visual of it to see. You're always welcome to join Byzantine or any other Eastern Church. Liturgy.
Wow, it's a big recruitment there.
Yeah, we got some
slide in there.
Yeah, apologetics happening right now. I love this. It's not cringe if done well.
Right.
As long as it lands.
Right. So basically the altar and where the tabernacle sits is not separated, right? They're connected. Like imagine, yeah. But then you can still walk around it because the priest he'll sit in the back. Right.
There's like a space back there. Okay.
Yeah.
There it is. Well, all right. What are thoughts on music, clapping at the liturgy?
At first I think, I don't know about you guys. Clapping has happened, but it doesn't happen every Mass. So I think we need to look at why, when it happens, does it happen? It usually has something to do with what's going on. So when I've seen it, it's usually been maybe there's like a special choir performing. Maybe it's like a children's choir or like a special guest one, and they maybe they've sung a song that I don't want to say he's really difficult, but maybe there's a lot of moving parts to it, a lot of high notes, not something that you would get in everyday Sunday Mass. I think that's usually why it happens. So we need to ask that question first, is when we think something special happens that normally outside of the Mass we would clap for, how do we best express as an audience that maybe should be acknowledged better than, not that anything that's wrong, maybe what's usually happening in Sunday Mass, but to acknowledge something extraordinary or unique is happening at that Mass. That's why the audience is clapping. Because it's not, for me at least, it's not an every week thing that I've noticed. It's usually there's something special going on.
Right. And I was going to mention that as Catholics, we believe the holy sacrifice of the Mass to be the crucifixion of Christ, right, and the resurrection happening in real time. So imagine being at the cross and then someone just awkwardly clapping after Jesus gives his final breath. That would be cringe, right?
Yeah.
Right. And they're not doing it to be disrespectful, right? But they're just doing it with the lack of knowledge or understanding of what's happening, right? And so that's why it's cringe for Catholics that people clap during Mass, especially since it's liturgical. But after Mass, again, it's not liturgical at that point. So that's the question of whether or not it's okay to clap at that point. But I notice at the Basilica, Our Lady of Victory, they'll have the organist playing a beautiful piece, right, at the end of the Mass, and he'll continue on after Mass, and then people will clap at that point. And to me, that doesn't seem to be inappropriate because they're clapping at his performance.
Well, there is clapping in the middle of the Mass. If there's a baptism or some kind of sacrament, people will usually clap after that is done. So do we take that off the table too, or are we okay with occasional clapping because it's for that sacrament in a special circumstance?
I take a really hard line. If it's in the liturgy, no clapping at all. That's me. And
so kid just made his first communion.
Yeah, no,
it's
not.
No, it's not worthy of being.
Oh man.
Yeah, no.
Well, here's
and it's not that I'm not recognizing that. The way that I am participating in that is that I'm being attentive and I'm there and I'm praying with them. But they don't need, you have all the rest. I think that what happens so much with stuff like that, whether it's music or just pumping the liturgy with things that are not liturgical, it's we don't put enough time and energy into making sure that those things happen outside of the Mass. It's we're not going to we clap for the first communicant who just received the first communion, and then we don't have follow-up gathering afterwards or something, where that would have been the place where it was hey, this person just received the first communion, and clap for them over in the parish hall. Great. Nothing wrong with that. But in the liturgy is where it's the problem. It's this is a place, this is prayer and worship, and it's not about me, and it's not even about them. Like, it's not like the whole, no matter what's happening, it doesn't matter if it's a wedding or anything. We're there for, like, we're all, you know, people look east, except for the priest. Well, that's a different thing.
Right.
Dawn rises in the east, my man.
Yeah.
I feel like this is your cue.
Yeah, it is. So that means everyone should look east, right? Meaning that they should become Eastern. No, I'm just kidding.
All right, we know why Dennis is here now.
But speaking of that, we don't have that issue in the Eastern Church, of course. But speaking now from someone who's married into an African tribe, in Africa and different countries, right, where being, as you know as well, being outward and really physically animated is seen as being filled with the Spirit, right? In those masses, they tend to clap? I mean, and if they do, is that okay, right? And it seems to me that it is. Like maybe there's an expectation based on the culture, right?
Well, I would say, because I think when people clap in mass, it reminds me much of like clapping for the kids at the concert. Like, oh, this is like, you know, especially if it's for community kid, we clap for them, you know, after, you know, they had their concert the other day. We clap for them after the song. You know, I think a lot of people see it as like that's part of the same sort of deal as we're clapping for them because we're kind of in, I don't want to say autopilot, but this is what we do when somebody does something great or something important. And I guess maybe it's getting people out of that mindset of like, this isn't like, yes, they accomplished something. I know usually like in a concert that, you know, we would, you know, congratulate them for that, but this isn't the same thing.
And I think that's why it's cringe for some people, because it's like, it just kind of gives the air that it is becoming a concert or a performance. And I would hazard to guess that the challenge that we're faced with there, and this is how we can bring solutions into it, is, you know, we don't want to devolve into the sin or the vice of human respect, right? Human respect is where, you know, you place man before God. And it's something, you know, the opposite virtue needs to be instilled in our children from youth all the way up, right? It's part of formation. And I was going to get into this one later, but I think it really solidifies further Brady's point. You know, the whole like holding hands during the Pater Noster or the Our Father, right? I can give you a real world example of how this was challenging, because it's like people focused on, oh, it's about the kids though, and this, and it's like that's how you get a foot in the door, and then the door swings wide open, and now it's like a concert performance, right? It's the fact that we allow incrementally this, you know, irreverence, it looks like to some people, or at least just, you know, maybe ignorance or whatever. It depends on the circumstance, so I don't want to paint with broad strokes, but that aspect of it actually is within the context of liturgy. And Rome has made very clear over the times that it's considered a liturgical abuse to hold hands during the Our Father, right? So that is an objective standard that we can point to. This isn't just us, you know, riffing about our opinions or complaining. It's the fact that, you know, it takes away from the focus when everybody's doing that. Everybody's looking for a hand to grab, and you know, some people like to, you know.
So Rome has actually spoken that specifically?
They have. And it's, I mean, have you read those documents?
Yeah. Well, I haven't read the document on a primary as a primary source, but a secondary source.
Okay. Yeah. So thanks for backing that up here. And so how does that translate to a real world scenario, right? I'm a father. I've got, you know, a number of little kids. And we happen to be at a parish that we're not usually at, and it's the Our Father's going around. All of a sudden, we're flanked by most of the congregation does it there, and so then my little kid is grabbing for my hand, and I'm trying to tell them, hey, no, this isn't what we do. Prayer hands, right? And, you know, try to keep their focus. And I noticed like a really obvious like disapproving glares from other like older parishioners in the immediate pews next to us, almost looking at me like I'm a bad father. Like, why would you deny your child an opportunity?
No, I don't think they're even saying that. I think they're saying like you're doing the wrong thing. They actually like.
Well, it starts with that, right? It's like, one, why aren't you doing what we do? Two, it's like, what are you teaching your kids? I mean, that's how I took it, right? And then I felt like totally like out of place.
Well, no. I think they see it as like you're the one doing the liturgical abuse.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that's
of
how
course.
it's
Yeah,
that's
of
how
course.
it's gone around. Like I know, like for me, like my mom is real big on that. Like sometimes, like if I'll go with them, like and I'm holding up, like my mom will like almost grab my hand because she like I guess for her that's like ingrained, like it's something you like it's proper.
It's the kumbaya generation, man. And I don't say that about your mom. I just say that about in general with all these liturgical changes that took place.
Yes.
And we're all kind of suffering because of that.
I like the point that you made that like you feel out of place when you find you're trying to be reverent and you're trying to pray and you've taught your children a particular way to pray at Mass, and then there's some imposition, and the imposition isn't even like some other option that like Rome has given to do this. It's like a local custom that's sprung up and has become so strong, even though it is quasi liturgical abuse and cringe. And even if it's not, it's cringe.
Totally cringe.
It's definitely cringe.
Like not even a question.
And yeah, because I guess that's like something against too many local things getting into your like enculturation is a thing. Like we need to have culture does have some say in the way that you approach liturgy, but it shouldn't be the primary locus of like we've just always done it this way, or like this is something we do in this area. And it's like, but we're also the universal church, so like you go to a different church with your kids, you want to have this is the Mass, and the Mass is the Mass. So you want you like there's things you can expect, and then when something's just thrown out of left field, all of a sudden, even if it's a parish that's doing that thing because they want to be super welcoming, all of a sudden you feel unwelcome. And
isn't it funny how the tables turn? It's like, oh, we're all so welcoming and accommodating and tolerant, and until you're going against the grain all of a sudden, and it's you're actually adhering to the way it always was and the traditions, right? You made a comment, Francis, that I wanted to point out really quickly too about sometimes you see the context of people clapping when it's over. It's because it was a particularly more challenging work than usual. Okay, I represent the Latin Mass because it is, I think, the answer to many, many of the church problems. Not all of them. That could become its own topic of cringe, that people think it's the silver bullet when there still need to be checks and balances there as well. But, Gregorian chant is objectively considered the highest form of music, and it's also, one of the most challenging. There's all kinds of inflections and different things going on. And as somebody who has actually reintroduced, so, putting my money where my mouth is, I reintroduced Gregorian chant into the life of our diocese for the first time, arguably since 1969 itself. It is extremely challenging. It takes a lot of work and preparation, and yet it's there every single Mass in and Mass out. So if the standard is, that level of beauty, then why do we need to clap? You know what I mean? And in the East, you've got chant as well. It's tremendously beautiful.
Gregorian chant actually came from the East originally.
Absolutely.
I think
credit where credit's
St. Ambrose, and then St. Gregory the Great, I believe, turned it into Gregorian chant.
Right.
But yes, I definitely. Whereas, the Masses originally with Augustine's time was, what was it, quiet? Was it like a low Mass almost? Until that was brought in from the East.
I'm not a
tonal
liturgical
chants.
expert from the Church Father era.
Yeah, if you read Confessions, he actually mentions that, I believe, towards the end.
I think it was Ephraim the Syrian who was one of the first people, and actually in a very enculturated kind of way, he was seeing that there were these cults who had these like women choirs, which was like scandalous. And of course, the music that was there was to facilitate a very evil thing in that group. But he saw that this was a very attractive thing. Like he saw through it that there's potential in the concept of having a choir or even a women's choir, and he brought them together and started like adapting local tunes and things to Catholic Christian things. Yeah. And it was still like, cutting edge at that time,
right.
But it would be things that we would think are super traditional now.
Right. And there's a lot to say on that though too, because even in the West, right, you have the organ, which originally was played during the Christian martyrdoms in the Colosseum, right? So that was brought into the Mass, which I think St. Augustine didn't like because it had that pagan feel, right? It had the secular feel, which today we think, oh, it's sacred, right? But that's just because we've been using it for the past almost 2,000 years now, right? And, well, not quite, but what, 17, 1800 years?
Acculturation's a double-edged sword.
Exactly, yeah. So, but then again, you want to go back to King David in Scripture and Moses. And if you see liturgically in the Old Testament, Moses had that like low mass kind of feel to the ritual sacrifices, whereas King David brought in the music and the dancing, right? Which is, I guess, maybe something that the East had brought in originally, as you just mentioned, from the Syriac Church. So you can look at it both, in both ways there, but ultimately, I think the Church focuses on King David as being that the epitome of the liturgy in the Old Testament, comparatively to the New. So we would want to have that music and singing, right? But we have to do it the right way according to church standards.
Probably shouldn't do it exactly like King David, though, because wasn't the leader of the music like the cymbal player or something?
Yeah, well, and that's an argument, right?
The rat shreds would have him at the stake.
Right.
Well, and that's an argument too, because then in Revelation, right, aren't there trumpets in heaven, portrayed, and guitars? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. I guess.
No, we've actually endured, quasi like threats, like, oh, if you like tambourines or this or that, you're not welcome here. So that's a real thing. There's people that take a very hardline stance on this stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's like, they say that to people that are like, yeah, no, actually same team. Like, why are you even like, what? No, don't want that. But yeah, so I guess here's a question, right? What is the balance between adhering to an objective standard, right? Because I think a solution or a perceived solution for a lot of people to these kinds of issues is stick to the rubrics, right? And I would argue in many, if not all cases, going beyond the rubrics is cringe, right? Because it fosters obedience, right? Many traditionalists have made a tremendous point that it's in giving all of these Eucharist prayer options to the priests and giving all of these options that, and versus populum versus ad orientem, it's like it can allow for a climate where it turns into that performance instead of remembering that this is a sacrifice. I mean, you've got an offertory, a slaying of a victim, and a consummation of that victim, right? This is serious stuff. And, but then there's also, as you guys just, really laid the groundwork well, is there is a progression over the course of church history. There are things that get changed and added and removed from liturgy, right? Never the essentials, but extra. And so how do you balance following the rubrics, adhere to the rubrics, with allowing for that like custom to come in without taking over, since it is at that subjective level?
Well, for one, everyone has to know what the rubrics are.
I like it. Just like we had to start by defining what cringe is, right?
And I
There's
mean,
people. People don't know the rubrics exist or what they are. For a lot of people, a lot of Catholics out there, you just said a foreign term.
So now we can tell them, go to the germ, or the GIRM. Brady?
The general instruction of the Roman Missal.
There it is. For the West, of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
Indeed. No germs in the East?
No, I think we're COVID-free.
Oh, it's a beautiful thing,
But anyway, yeah, so general instruction of the Roman Missal. And you can see what the current rubrics are. And then we go from there. That has to be implemented inside every parish. But how is that going to happen if it's not being spread by someone? I mean, that's kind of why we're here as well, right, on this channel, to help us to understand what should be done and what shouldn't be done. And then the freedom therein, right? Brady, I'm just going to maybe kick it to you about Chesterton's quote regarding the fence. You can see a fence as being a negative or a positive thing.
Oh yeah, so this is fun actually, because this term has been cropping up not just in Christian or Catholic circles, but in the wider culture has kind of started adopting this term called Chesterton's fence. So it's basically that when you see a fence, some people want to just leave it alone, some people want to tear it down, but sometimes the reason you have to find out why the fence was put there in the first place before you either build it up or tear it down. So yeah, if what was the thing
Oh,
we were talking about
the
before?
negative or positive perspective on the fence, right? Because we're looking at the germ, right?
Yeah.
So we want to be able to see, is there freedom, right? The freedom that we have, and why that's a good thing.
Yeah, so like we need to look at every, like, carefully discerning, okay, is this one of those solid, unchanging, we shouldn't mess with this types of things, or is this something like, okay, this can add a little flavor to this thing, and we have to be, and we can't just use like my personal preference as the way that I figure that out. Like, well, I don't like Gregorian chant, so I guess maybe that's not essential. Like, no, like I'm just wrong. I'm just objectively wrong because it's the pride and place, blah blah blah, Vatican II. But
Isn't that funny?
Right.
We actually adhere to Vatican II, right?
that's the thing, and that I think that's such a source of cringe for me is just that struggle. I mean, not even all the, like you said, people don't know the germ, but even the leaders, the people who are leading music, the people who are leading liturgy, they don't know. Like I would take it, I would be happy just if they knew.
Yeah, right.
Like if they knew, because then they're directing and they're training altar servers and they're doing music and like then it can if we can't get our leaders on board, which is I think such a struggle, then
And you've worked in that field, so you know.
yeah, and I'm very involved in my parish, and I'm currently trying. It's a constant source of cringe for me to be like, I feel like I'm the only person reading these things, and I can't just say, here, read this book, because nobody's going to read.
Actually, that's a really
So,
good point. And Francis, you've had a lot of experience in parish life as well. Like, what would you say about? Obviously, we need to try to get our pastors on board, right? Because the pastor is the head of any given parish, and there is an authority structure that we need to adhere to if we're going to try to impact the culture in a positive way. I don't want to get too ahead of it, but because first it's how do you do that, but then we can also get into what happens when that doesn't happen, which I'm sure, at least some of us maybe have experienced before.
Well, I think the other issue with this too is how do you put this in? How do you implement this? How fast? Because if you just put it in all at once, you're just going to scare people away. And you don't want that either. Then you'll have an empty parish and you have all these people that are lost souls. But at the end of the day, you also you got to teach them right from wrong. And they talk about a church being not a museum for saints, but a hospital for sinners. But you still got to treat those sinners. You can't just put them in a bed and just have them lay there. You still got to kind of treat them. And I think it's tough finding that balance between, we want this to be welcoming, so to speak. Keep you coming. But we want to make sure that you get to heaven. So we're not just going to keep giving you cookies just to keep you coming. We also we got to have talk about our truths and do things in a certain way.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one thing I think is just a hopefully common sense is for any of us to just appeal to our pastors, and we can do it right here, right now for anybody that might be tuning in, please just educate us from the pulpit. Incorporate it into your homily, right? Because you're the culture maker, right? Like if you notice people are holding hands during the Our Father, don't succumb to human respect and say, well, it works for that family. The thing is then it's going to spread to more families, and now all of a sudden it's out of control, right? And it's going to be more uncomfortable to tell everyone to stop doing it instead of just make a blanket statement and allow for appealing to objectively what Rome, has stated, to just be a part of being Catholic is obedience, right? It's literally one of the 3 evangelical councils.
Yeah, and going back to Chesterton's fence, I mean, if you have that that guidance, right, that you're on a cliff really, and that fence is protecting you from falling off the cliff instead of protecting you from or preventing you from freedom. No, the true freedom is knowing the boundaries and playing within it. And if we have those boundaries met, then we can have the creativity without falling off the cliff, right?
and vice versa. We can see if the fence is put there and really it is blocking us. Whoa. Whoop.
We're good.
Blocking it.
Minimal
It's
spillage.
all good, man.
Right.
Hey, this is meant to protect the nice wooden table.
Exactly. You haven't seen what's under the table yet.
But
White oak?
so some fences need to be torn down, and sometimes those fences are beloved by local communities, and it's like one thing for me, and it's cringe, and stuff, and it's a hot topic, but just children's liturgy, this like taking the kids away during the liturgy of the word and having something for them during that time.
I just heard a Polish priest give a homily just the other day saying how he's totally not on board with those. And he explained to everybody why.
I want to
From the pulpit, which was,
I'm like working on a book right now, basically. Kind of. It's just like a intellectual project of like.
You heard it here
why.
first on the Rich Dawn.
Now I have to do it.
Yeah.
I've mentioned it.
The lights are on.
Oh, no. So what's it called?
We
when
can,
is
we
it
can
coming
edit that out, right?
There's
We can
the
snip
publisher.
that. Okay.
Just like we're going to edit out your spill. Not.
Yeah. But
Nazarovia.
that's a fence I want to.
Salute.
That is definitely a fence that it's like pick your battle. So it's like not a battle that's like on my plate right now, but it's there. It's waiting. It's a war waiting to be waged. So, but yeah, because it's cringe, and then, like cringe is even the like. Oh, you were talking about objective things, but even the subjective things. It's like certain things, even if it's not like technically a liturgical abuse. If it's ugly, like ugliness is opposed to goodness. Like truth, beauty, and goodness are you can't just separate them and like silo them somehow. It doesn't work. It's kind of like virtue. Like if you grow in one virtue, you're probably growing in others. And if you grow in one vice, you're probably growing in others. Like if you have some ugly thing in the liturgy, it's going to produce ugly results in the way that people either interact with the liturgy or the way that they're able to pray. So like if you have a cubist stained glass window, it's not really facilitating much of a meditation. It's probably more of a hindrance and distracting. Like what is that? Like as opposed to like a powerful like something like this painted on the wall. It's great. Yeah.
And you haven't even seen episode 25. This is going to be 26, but that was the introduction to this artwork, and we actually, the whole episode is about beauty, which is what you're talking about, right? I opened by mentioning there's this eternal debate about whether it itself is a transcendental like truth and goodness, and this isn't the place to get into that pro or contra, but the point is whether or not it is so integrally connected to lifting the mind to the divine, and a beautiful piece of work like this demonstrates that.
So it's cringe to not put our best foot forward with art and beauty and music and liturgical vestments and even like a poise in how we address the people. Like it's like, hey everybody, how's it going today? And it's
Go Bills.
Go Bills. Yeah.
Oh.
Don't anybody watching who is addressing people at mass, do not just don't. I challenge you. No more Go Bills.
Before or
And we say
after
it
the
as
mass
someone
is
that just
officially
rooted for the
over.
No, just don't use the word bills in the sanctuary at all, or in the nave, or
Are
anywhere.
you trying to get canceled here?
I do want
This is a hill I'm ready to die on.
better
and
him
you
than
all know.
the host. And we opened this episode saying "Go Bills." By the way, this is a much more appropriate place, to have a table here versus Populu. No,
Or in the narthex, right?
yeah. Oh, actually, that's another thing that's super cringe.
What's a
for me.
narthex? No.
Oh, right. Let's define our terms.
Different from the nave.
It's that place in the back of the church that's where talking is supposed to happen. This is a good one, right? Generally speaking, you shouldn't be having conversations in the sanctuary, right? Even before or after Mass. Now, that being said, I've seen some rigid people in this realm, right? I'll give you a perfect example. My wife and I returned to a parish after doing years of tremendous service and going through a lot. And then we showed up and we were given like kind of like a hero's welcome, like our Lord coming back to Jerusalem or something. And it was totally, obviously by default, the humility in me feels like it's undeserved and it just feels weird. And it was kind of cringe actually, but I literally couldn't do anything about stopping it. But I wanted to bring it to the narthex. And then people just like started yelling at me. And it's like, did you not see that I'm the recipient of this, not the initiator? And it's like, whatever. But that being said, yes, in general, you ought to be in the narthex having these conversations. And even if you're in the narthex, conversations shouldn't be happening during Mass. I've noticed this is an epidemic, actually. I've seen this in most parishes I've ever gone to, and no, the Latin Mass is not exempt. In fact, I see it there as much as anywhere. And what I've noticed is the pattern is usually the people that are doing it are people that are like many of us, if not all of us actually. It's someone that definitely does give a lot to the life of the parish, but the problem with that is pride creeps in some shape or form, right? I mean, Ecclesiasticus 10:15 states that all sin is rooted in pride, right? So no matter what your deadly sin is, it's pride in some sense. It's choosing yourself over God. And that's exactly what you're doing when you're talking in the middle of Mass, right? Now, if an authorized choir director is, giving a command, or if
Parent is talking to their child,
then that's obviously understandable. But anything other than that, it can wait. Right? I mean, I don't know.
Or you get out of the sanctuary and you take care of it back there if it's that urgent.
So you're saying you can't take phone calls during Mass, like I've seen?
What about the phone ringing during Mass? During the consecration?
Especially when like some
Cringe.
parishes have like the please turn off your not your minds. I was just
What kind of programming do you get at your parish?
we can sniff it out right now.
Cringe.
No, I was like my eye was resting on the quote and the word minds in the quote, but no.
Yes.
And now I'm completely direct. What was I talking
You
about?
turn
You
off.
were saying it literally tells you turn off your phone before you enter the sanctuary,
or
and
like-
people still fail to do it.
Right. It's like people are like, oh yeah, it's probably off.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's Jurassic Park. Where did that come from? Okay.
And
Anyway.
then have you ever had that happen and then they answer it? I've had that.
Yeah, that's what I was
Maybe
referring
once,
to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're actually talking there, like they're just sitting there talking.
That's like a 1, 2, 3 whammy. It's at least if it's in the narthex, but if it's out of the sanctuary and that's happening, that's like maximum cringe. Yeah.
And they're like loud too. They're not trying to whisper. They're like, "Oh yeah, Nancy just told me the other day." I mean, it's just I've had it happen at a Novus Ordo Mass.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've had it where like I'll go to Mass somewhere and there'll be people praying afterwards, like actively praying out loud, and there's still people like having conversations, and they think they're like being like whispering, but they're actually not.
No.
And it's
Right.
just like, what do you do? Like, do you like say the rosary louder just to like try to like get the idea like, hey, people are praying over here, like
Right.
this isn't appropriate? But that is kind of mind-boggling. I was actually at a Mass recently. I arrived like 45 minutes early, and there was these two older gentlemen talking with each other almost up until like Mass started, like having a conversation with each other, and they were being friendly, saying hi to people, and it's like, and like you feel bad because they're probably older and they don't like they might not do very much like out. This might be like their one time a week where they actually like interact with people, which I think is another thing like that, like, you were mentioning earlier, like other places where like that we make sure that these interactions can happen, but like still it's like for a good 45 minutes they're right by the entrance, so they're like anybody they see that they know, there's like, hey buddy, hey, how you doing, and it's just like, dude, like people are praying right now, like this is like, it's not even like after, like even like after Mass, if like no one's praying, I don't feel quite as bad about it. Like I think part of it is like what's going on, like do you see people praying right now, do you not, like just like that, like awareness of it. But yeah, before it was like 45 minutes like these guys were talking, and it was like,
Wow.
like I didn't want to say anything because I couldn't figure out of a charitable way to like say it, and I didn't want to be like telling the old guys they can't talk to each other or whatever. But
I
like,
would. In fact, I have. I'm thinking about my devotion to St. Agnes right now. On our honeymoon, we went to Italy, and we went through the whole tour of one of those catacombs. And the tour ends. I mean, just try to picture this for a minute, right? Like, I'm literally meditating, contemplating on the sacrifice that the early Christians had to make in order for us to enjoy and appreciate what we take for granted now, right? Like that their lives were at risk constantly. They had to be underground in order to say their masses. People were, gossiping about them in a way that was like, they were accusing us of cannibalism, all this crazy stuff, but we still had to do it, either way. And then you enter, and we're in there for, I don't know, it felt like an hour. It probably wasn't quite that long, and then you come out from that up into, you meet St. Agnes, right? Hey, St. Agnes, you learn all the, the history of the papal, I don't remember the name of it, but the garb that where with the wool and how they craft one every year for the Pope. It's a ancient tradition. And then you get into this beautiful church, and then the boomers start talking in our tour, just yapping for 20 minutes before Mass started. I think I lasted almost 5 minutes, and I cracked, and I went up to him, the choleric in me. I was just like, listen, you got to go in the back, buddy. You know, and they were like twice my age, and they gave me that like, hey man, why are you telling us what to do? You're half our age kind of a vibe at first, but I stuck to my guns and I said, do you realize everything that we just experienced today? You know, like we're all here trying to appreciate this. You can continue talking about your cars. They were talking about cars, like, you know, sports cars. And I was like, you can I'm not asking you to stop having your conversation. I'm just asking you to do it over there, please. And then they realized I was serious about it and I was polite, but I was firm. And they were like, the final look they gave me was one of tremendous respect. They were like, you know what, man? All right, we'll go. Yeah, all right. Sorry about it. It was very hard for them to apologize, but they did. And then life moved on, and we all got a good 10, 15 minutes before Mass started in silence. So I don't know. It's
good, man, or else they would have kept talking.
Yeah, and that's how I remember that experience, and I'm thankful for remembering it the way I do. If I didn't do something, I'd have a whole different memory. But yeah, so maybe you have to, and again, I just say that to say a lot of what we're coming up with here is battling the vice of human respect. I think it's so important for us to remember that God is no respecter of persons. That's why you shouldn't be having like celebrity freak out for anybody. No one deserves that.
So even though Taylor Swift is here right now,
do we know that
is
for
she
sure?
Here?
Yeah, man.
Oh, dude, I can't wait to see her boy lose. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Her live-in boyfriend or whatever it might be. I don't know.
You're a Swift fan, right? No, I'm just kidding.
More than Bill's.
Oh wow!
No.
Oh, we got a Swiftie. We snuffed out the Swiftie.
I will take neither, please.
Well, I guess you'll be entertained today anyway. You know,
I'm probably just going to be really distracting during the game. I'm just continuing this conversation probably.
I'm going to tell you to go in the north end.
Take it to the north.
A warning for you know who.
Yes. I can handle it.
Okay.
You know, but yeah, no, but and also, so that's one thing, right? Solution. Acknowledge human respect for what it is. Recognize that we're called to be like God in all ways, which includes not being a respecter of any person. So you shouldn't be succumbing to ageism. You shouldn't be succumbing to, you know, any form of human respect. But you still remain polite. You don't do it in anger. You know, but you be firm and you set strong boundaries and you stick to them. And then also, I want to swing the pendulum into the middle, right? Virtue lies in the mean. We mentioned the phone going off or whatever. I mean, I've seen scenarios where you get an older person who might not be technologically advanced, and you can see that they're struggling to turn the thing off, and that they're, you know, you're not even. This is another one. You're not really supposed to be looking at people next to you or behind you during church.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's actually considered an abuse, right? That's a vice. It's like you're supposed to be focused on Christ, but if you were to look back at them, they probably have rosy red cheeks, right? Like they're embarrassed. So it goes both ways. We have to be charitable. You don't club someone over the head because they made a mistake, right? Time and place. I have noticed.
You do your best to ignore it. You can't treat that as like a little
right,
and you take it as a penance.
Yeah.
You got to keep your focus. I'm sorry.
No, yeah. St. Therese of Lisieux talked about this like really annoying member in the choir who would like make this clicking noise all the time, I think it was, and she learned how. She was like, I can't control this, and then she had to come to a place of acceptance, and she offered it up, and then she gained her peace. And so it's, you know, it's time and place, but
and I kind of view like, you know, children crying in the sanctuary is the same thing.
Oh, that's the choir of angels.
Well, yeah, and then I was like, you know, sometimes you ever hear like, oh, the kids are too loud, you know, they need to go to the back, which, you know, in prudence sometimes they do, but like I view it as like, would you rather like to have like no children in your parish and they could be completely quiet? Like, I'd rather have them at the Mass. It's way more important that they're there.
Yeah. Well, quoting Father Ripperger, though, he does say as soon as your child starts making noise, you should take them and bring them in the back, you know, in the child room, because you don't want them to distract you.
Prudent.
Yeah.
But I guess for my own, I'm just like, you know, like
Yeah.
I'm
agree
a single
with you.
I don't have any kids, so I haven't. But I mean, just like when I hear it, I'm just like, it's something like another penance. Like I got to offer this up. Like it's God telling me I got to focus even more on what's happening at the altar.
But I like what you said, because I've done that too, where if I hear children and it's maybe distracting me, I'm at least happy that there are children here, and I try to meditate on that.
Yeah.
Yes. Suffer not anything to happen to one of these little ones, right? And yeah, and I mean, okay, as a parent of multiple small children, right? If they're doing a little yelp of joy every minute or two, that's quite different than, every couple seconds. And it's quite different than like it being, crying or whining. I almost think hearing those little like yelps of joy are like, I think they add to the mass.
Yeah.
In a way, right? That's what I mean by the choir of angels. And I've noticed that most of the people that really bothers them are the people that, like you said, literally have never been a parent themselves. And that leads me to another cringe thing in the life of the church. It's that the latest stats say that at least 90-something% of Catholics contracept.
Yes.
That is objective grave matter. That's mortal sin territory. That means like you're destined for hell if you realize that you're not supposed to be doing that.
Right.
So,
to be fair, based on our previous comments, a lot of them probably don't really have a very formed understanding that it is wrong.
Right.
Or they just think, that's an old school thing.
It's the basis of
Right.
abortion.
It's archaic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the basis of abortion, right? Because what happens if the contraceptive fails? People play God and they murder, right?
Well, and some contraceptives are indeed murdering children.
In and of themselves,
Yes,
right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, the 72-hour after pill or whatever they call it.
Plan B
But,
as well. Yeah.
oh my goodness, I remember a time when I went to get the pregnancy test and saw a box of a contraceptive, and it actually had a flagrant lie on it. It said, if you take this a couple days after, it doesn't cause any harm or any pain or whatever it said. It doesn't cause any harm. It literally says that about murder. Yeah. So that's really bad. But anyways, to bring it back full circle, the point is I've had to find myself explaining, like, and you guys all know, right? We're all members of the Dynamis ministry. In fact, I think we've all been rolling deep in our friendship, by extension beyond that, for 5 years, about all of us here, which is one reason we have a great synergy. And as you guys know, like sometimes when we're introducing the meat of the faith, sometimes it's just like so comprehensive that people initially gloss over because they're like, how did I go my entire young adult life and never even know that any of this has anything to do with Catholicism? In fact, I think you mentioned that on episode 9 of this channel.
And you know what? You really opened my eyes to a lot of things that I just didn't think were things. Like, I didn't really understand what mortal sin was, what venial sin was.
And I find myself having to make the case, like, recognize that over 9 out of 10 Catholics literally have no idea what they're doing. Therefore, you have to be really, really careful about what you're being told is the right thing. And it's sad and scary that has to be true, but it doesn't change the fact that this is all objectively verifiable. It has nothing to do with me. It has nothing, don't kill the messenger. But this is what our generation is struggling with, because we are kind of in a crisis in the life of the church. I think we could all agree with that in some way, shape, or form. And we have to be able to start by laying the groundwork that, hey, there's work to do. There's a lot of cringe out there. And here's why many people don't even realize, to your point, Brady, that these are concerns.
Dennis, I want to ask you, because we're in the Buffalo area where it's Roman Catholicism is the most popular, I would say, religion here. And I think you get a lot of people talking about the lack of commitment. They do it just because their family's always done it. They don't really, so they're not really invested that much. It's just kind of something they do. Do you find, because like the Eastern Church is a little smaller here, that the people here are more committed, or do you kind of see that same thing, like it's just something that our family has done for generations, so you still see a lot of the same liturgical abuses and lackadaisicalness in the Eastern Church?
And more importantly, cringe.
Yeah, cringe as well.
Yeah. Tell us about how everything's incredible in the East, but then let's get to challenges in there too.
No, we don't struggle with that there, because we've kept the traditions from the early church. I mean, there's some very minor changes. Latinized changes to the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church in recent years, and a lot of that has to do with the Russian persecution or the Soviet Union persecution, and then trying to distinguish themselves from the Russian Orthodox Church. So there's some changes there, like we used to veil, but we really don't anymore because we're trying to look different from the Russian Orthodox Church, for example, which is debatable.
That's so sad because not too long ago, to become Latinized would mean you would do it.
I know these are minor changes, right? And they're not even official, by the way. It depends what parish you're in at the end of the day. So other than that, I mean, I've experienced, talking in church, but that was something I wanted to bring up earlier, was because we have the holy doors, the gates, right, that open up. That's symbolic of heaven connecting with earth, and so anything past those gates, facing east, would be the sanctuary, and everything facing west, right, would be, I guess, representing of earth. And even the carpet's a different color. Like, I think the carpet's usually maybe blue or green where the people are in the pews, and then wherever the sanctuary is, it's red, symbolizing divinity, because in the east, red is divinity. And so I think there is I really don't know the debate that's happening, but I have.
Well, I just mean like an overall, just like people kind of showing like more of the things we're talking about in terms of like, I mean, a lot of this stuff, like especially like talking in church, because it comes to people just being ignorant and not knowing any better and not caring to know any better. Do you think there's less of them in the Eastern Church because there's less people maybe in this area? Like, do you feel like a bigger percentage of the people who come to the Eastern Church are more committed?
Yes. Yeah. And I think a lot of the East, though, is connected with cultural significance, like whether you're Ukrainian or Greek or Ruthenian or whatever it may be, right? So they have that cultural connection in the East more so. And because I think it's smaller, there's more of that tight-knit community. But also I just think because we were, I think, a little bit better catechized than Western Catholics. And so we really don't have that issue, especially in the East. We've never had an issue where people don't believe in the real presence of the Eucharist. And that's nothing that we've never struggled with that on any widespread scale, right? Or even small scale. I mean, there's really no trace of that I've ever heard of because of the liturgy so focused on the Eucharist. But again, there's always going to be an issue. There's always going to be issues. The talking, like I said, there are people that talk, after church. Maybe that's because the church is too small and there's really not much. Maybe there's not much room in the narthex to talk, or just because that's not something that's a clear-cut distinguishing point because of the holy doors, right? Distinguishing between the sanctuary and the pews.
So the pews is part of earth.
That's my perspective on that matter. Yeah, when the doors open, that's when heaven's touching earth, and connecting with it. Yeah.
So we might be going off track a little bit, but I'm just curious. Are the narthexes then like a normal architectural part of Eastern Catholic churches? Or is it just a vestibule and then the nave and the sanctuary? Or
yeah, can we define these for everybody? By the way,
yeah, that's probably good. I was a little lost too.
I'll let Brady do it. Go for it.
Great.
Oh well, it's just like architecturally speaking, and I don't know exactly the full timeline, but basically, like if you had all the pieces, it would be like you're outside, and then you come into the vestibule, which would be like this is where you put your coat, this is where you can have conversations.
To wipe off your feet.
Right. It's just the first inner chamber of the church. And then you'd have the narthex, which would more traditionally be something that would maybe narrower, darker kind of room where it's sort of separating, like it's kind of dark, so it's sort of like going from the darkness of the world into the light of the nave and the sanctuary. So kind of the separation between, that's what made me think of it when you were like, there's a separation for the sanctuary and the nave, but I was thinking of the narthex as this like portal between like, okay, now we're like exiting the world, we're entering heaven now.
Right.
And then the nave would be the place where all the pews are, or I mean, back in the day there weren't pews. It's a very recent development.
It is, right?
so where the pews and where all the people sit, and then however the sanctuary is sectioned off, whether it's just like that sort of tiered, steps up to where the altar is, or in your case, like the is iconostasis, is that the right word?
Yeah.
Iconostasis, the big wall with all the paintings and icons, and the gate into the sanctuary.
Correct.
Where is like the Holy of Holies, the place where all the action happens.
Right.
So where the tabernacle is, where the altar is.
Praise God.
Yeah. So that'd be that's why and we use like the church or the sanctuary sometimes is like, especially like I came from a Protestant tradition, and the sanctuary is just the church.
Right.
It's just the church. There's no real distinction, but when we're talking, and we still kind of equivocate a little bit, but
yeah.
Did I hit it all?
Yeah, I think you did. I think you did a great job.
Great. Thank you.
So, perfect. I studied that when I was in Austria. Did you ever go to Austria? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I forgot which class it was. It was an art class, a sacred art class. So, sorry for forgetting the name if the professor's watching this by any chance. But anyway, yeah. So that was a great thing to learn about, because the church is kind of designed off the human body as well, right? In a sense, you have the arm, like the basilicas, for example. You have the arms welcoming everybody. That's why it's shaped like that at St. Peter's. It's welcoming you into the church's womb, right, to where you're baptized, and that's why baptism happened, right, in the narthex, right? Usually, or the vestibule,
because it's like the birth canal of the church.
Yeah, and then you go into,
and so every week we're going back, we're being born anew again every week going into the church.
Yeah. So the East is like that too. Obviously, we have some architectural differences. We have the dome usually, more of a rounded maybe structure, but yeah, no pews originally, right? You stood the whole liturgy.
Pews were originally very cringe.
Yeah, right.
Very much very cringe.
That's a Protestant
right
machination.
Yeah. Really? I didn't realize that one.
Yeah. That began with the Protestants.
So that's what's interesting, because we can talk more about all these different topics, but due to time, right, we want to start a narrow end. But let's maybe go to cringe, and maybe in the West a little bit, or in the traditional West, because like you said, a lot of these things that are traditional are really new in the life of the church.
Well, right? as someone who's very partial to the Latin Mass, I've this is something that's become near and dear to my heart, and not in a good way. And I'm sad to have to represent this aspect of it, because one thing that I've noticed in the traditional Latin Mass community, as you're mentioning, is that while there is tremendous beauty and there is a preservation of the authentic tradition, which is so important, and it's a necessary part of everything that's going on in the life of the church, it also comes with some serious challenges. One of which, cringe, is liturgical supremacy in general, right? There's definitely not a few that believe that it's, TLM or die, the Latin Mass is the only way. And there's just, you need to put so much nuance on explaining where the boundaries are between what is objectively real and true and allowed in the life of Holy Mother Church, in terms of respecting all three of her pillars, right? Scripture, tradition, magisterium, versus then maybe devolving into preferences, right? Like, I prefer the Latin Mass personally, hugely. And I do think that it's going to, I think it has the potential to save the future of the church. I think that when St. Pius V codified the Latin Mass, he wanted to centralize. He also allowed any liturgical expressions that were 200 years or older to remain, right? You had certain Dominican rites and other rites. I think I'd like to see Holy Mother Church, at the very least, respect the continuation of Latin Mass in that manner. And keep the Latin Mass and the Novus Ordo side by side, and let's see where the babies continue to develop.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And then we can continue to have a conversation later about maybe what should remain or how it's going to amalgamate in the future, right? But there's the difference between what we prefer and what we would like to see, and going too far with the supremacy and saying, like, this is the only way that it can be, or else you're not a true Catholic, right? There's a verticality and a horizontality component to schism. St. Thomas Aquinas talks about, many know when they hear the word schism, it means, a lack of unity, like choosing, willing, a lack of unity, right? everyone understands the vertical component, which is a lack of unity with the Pope, right? You know, you're not Catholic if you don't submit to the Pope.
Right.
But then there's also this horizontality. And I've noticed in, you know, going throughout the country, you know, my wife and I and our kids did a 22-state tour a couple of years ago. And, you know, we had the great joy to experience many Latin Mass communities. So I got to kind of anthropologically notice the cultural patterns throughout the nation. And, you know, the horizontal concern is a refusal to be in communion with other Catholics who are also in communion with the Holy Father. And that, I think, is where you get a lot of cringe. A lot of cringe. I was just having a conversation recently with a father who, you know, was trying to kind of fit in with a bunch of fellow dads. You know, you've got trad communities, you've got homeschool communities, right? You've got co-ops. There's a part of this culture where there's a lot of interplay, right? And, you know, he just said to me straight up, he's like, man, I kind of want to get involved with the Latin Mass because it's hard to understand if you've never been introduced to it. You kind of alluded to that when you walked into one, right? You know, you need to be catechized to inform, to understand how to get the most out of it, right? But he was like, honestly, like, I don't ever remember in our parish's men's group coming together and just spending a bunch of time together, just, you know, joking about how awesome our Novus Ordo is. He's like, we just don't do that. Like, we just love God and we grow in virtue. And he's like, and every time I hang out with these trads, I try to like want to care about what they care about. He's like, but the way they do it, it's like he's like, I don't know how to even begin to fit in because they're constantly like, you know, like, oh my goodness, the Latin Mass is so awesome, to the point where like, this is the only way to, it's like, I don't think they realize they're doing it.
Cringe, right?
It's super cringe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's uncharitable.
All right.
And, you know, because it's like, you think, if you think, which many do, they think it's like the only, if you're a Western Catholic, they think many think that it's the only legitimate form of the liturgy and that the Novus Ordo is suspicious, right? Many believe this theory that Bunini, who was the architect in concert with Paul VI to bring the Novus Ordo about, that he was a Freemason, right? That's an extremely serious charge. I've yet to see any corroborating evidence, any photographic evidence. Even Father Ripperker claims we have the photos. You know, I challenge him. Like, that's not some poker chip to save for when it's convenient. That is like a matter of public concern that everyone should know now. Right. And I don't subscribe to the notion that the Freemasons scrubbed that from the internet. You're never going to find it in the internet. The internet has reached a point where there are a lot of advanced tech people like myself who know how to make it unerasable from the internet, right? So let's do it. And if it happens, then we need to have a whole nother conversation, right? Like, whoa, is the Novus Ordo really just a Masonic temple, as these trads claim? But until that time comes, if you genuinely think that the Novus Ordo writ large, which is, I mean, what is the percentage of Catholics in the West that go to a Novus Ordo versus a Latin Mass today?
I don't know the exact number, but I'm going to say 90s, yeah.
If you genuinely believe that all of these people are like adhering to a mass that is objectively a source of evil, as the SSPX says, how are you going to catechize
making a big claim there?
That's a huge claim. And you better be able to back it up with the amount of charity required to bring people into your fold. Unfortunately, you don't really see a lot of that. As one of my spiritual directors has said, who's huge in the trad community, you know, he stated, trads are typically their own worst enemy.
I'm going to say my opinion, and I see this with online orthodoxy as well. Kind of similar thing, like orthodoxy or nothing, right? I think that there's a lot of pride that goes into that. And I think that's because once you root out the lower levels of sin, the one that remains is pride, as Kyle mentioned earlier from Ecclesiasticus. So once you reach a certain point of maybe holiness even, or, you know, okay, you don't lust anymore, let's say, you don't, you don't steal, anything of the lower commandments 10 up until you get to number 1, then you begin worshiping, you have the temptation to worship yourself or blaspheme God. And I've actually heard that from a friend who used to be in a religious order that left. That's something that he ended up struggling with, was getting the temptation to blaspheme God after he rooted everything else out. that he can find in his life, right? So that's an interesting take there, right? That if you're dealing with people that are very serious about their faith, which trad Catholics are, which is great, and I commend them for that. They root out, they don't even watch movies that have any sort of, suspicion in them, right?
I know parents who take it upon themselves to edit films.
Wow.
Yeah, pious censorship, I would say.
Sure. So you get to that level, and now you're left with the pride, right? Right. Maybe you have the best. Maybe you have the best liturgy. You think, and you're living out the best kind of lifestyle, virtue, flourishing. But then now you're left with this one sin, which is run by Satan himself. And I think that's what we deal with, right? So, and that's where hatred comes from, and racism, all these evils that have existed in the past prior to the Vatican II, prior to Novus Ordo Mass, right? A lot of these sins were rampant back then, right? Murderous thoughts, right? Just look back to what did people struggle with prior to Vatican II, right?
And to that point, there were constant liturgical abuses in the Latin masses pre-Vatican II. People have this it's really obnoxious. It's kind of like that cringy
like rose-colored glasses.
If we could just go back to the 1950s, everything was great back then. It's like, okay, a lot of husbands were domestically abusing their wives back then. So what are we treating like it was some golden era? And so too, the liturgy, this is what I meant, that the Latin Mass is not the silver bullet to fix all of the church's problems. There still need to be checks and balances, right? When you start being suspicious of Rome or suspicious of your bishops or suspicious of this, and you get this in a lot of media apostolates as well. A lot of Catholics have no idea what's going on behind the curtain. Many of these media apostolates have zero relationship with their local bishops. None. And it's like, okay, so whose authority are you really operating under now? Right? That's a very slippery slope.
Their own authority. They think they're above.
And this is what happens in the trad communities and wherever, that they become their own magisterium. Right?
Pride.
So that's very, very cringe. And it's actually serious, because you mentioned murderous thoughts. I mean, yeah, death threats happen. They happen. Because you devolve into when you have power without legitimate authority, that's a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for corruption. It's a recipe for abuse. It's a recipe for making yourself the Pope, or really making yourself God. Right? It's an imbalance of those three pillars. Tradition to the detriment of magisterium in that case. Just like where Protestants do sola scriptura to the detriment of tradition and magisterium.
So we've covered a lot of different things with the church, with cringe, and different either institutional or a local parish level or personal spiritual life. So I had two different questions that came up when I was thinking about this talk. And one of them was, we've been recognizing things out there, but how do we recognize if we are participating in cringe?
Yes.
So that's the first question. And the second one that I had was, then I guess we've already been sort of doing this, but then how do we practically, apart from just being aware of what we should avoid, how do we help our parishes or our families or the people who don't understand, the people who have been going on autopilot, or they've been really formed by a particular tradition,
turning off their mind when they walk in,
right? Yeah.
Yes.
So those are my two questions, and I mean, we don't have to do both of them, but those are the two I thought follow out of this, because we were kind of getting into some bigger discussions. So how do we know if we're doing cringe? How do we know that this podcast now isn't cringe?
That's a good point.
Yes. This is like the Truman Show, is it called?
Yeah. Could be.
And then what do we do about it? How do we help other people, I guess, is the second question. So that's...
Well, like you said, start by helping ourselves, right? Interior conversion has to happen first. And I caveat at the beginning of this entire episode pedagogically for a reason. It's to say small minds talk about people, average minds talk about events, great minds talk about ideas, right? Contextualize that. Everything that we, by necessity, had to bring up today typically involves, people and events that have taken place, to to recognize that there's something wrong there, but to bring the idea in is to say, okay, what is the vice or the sin that we're targeting here? What is the antidote to that? How do I not do that myself, right? Obviously, we've done that while avoiding detraction or any of the sins of the tongue, gossiping, because obviously we didn't dox anybody. You be high level enough in order to be able to actually speak the truth about something. And what separates detraction from authoritatively being a part of the solution is to recognize, as we've all learned in Dynamis, right, that you need to have authority, necessity, and charity all operative at the same time in order to be avoiding those sins of the tongue, right? So just to start with that, in terms of that's what makes this not cringe, as long as we remain within those parameters, right? Because the pendulum I've seen swing in the other direction is people that do know these working definitions very, very well, and who are also like narcissistic or abusive, and they wield them as weapons against other people. They say, "Oh, don't commit the sin of detraction," and they throw that shade on other people in order to make it so that they have no space to even speak the truth. Right? So that's something to be really aware of and to be able to balance all of that. And from there, I would just say, I'll kick it off to any one of you. I mean, it's convert your own self, convert your own life, know these things like we're doing, understand and define and contextualize the difference between objective truth and subjective truth and where that hierarchically is, and then work within those parameters. Once you understand all of that, you can be part of the solution for others, right?
How do you get people to listen to you, though? Because that's what I've been like with the whole renewal thing, and we're like looking at every part of our parishes, and it's like there's a considerable mountain of cringe that we have to ask God to move.
Sure.
Well, hopefully this helps. If we can spread this video to people, because people would rather watch and listen than read nowadays. So
right.
That's what Dr. Jordan Peterson mentions, how podcasting has become the next revolution, right? Just like the printing press. What that brought about, people started to read books and learn through reading, and now it's through podcasting. People commute, hours a day to work, and he said this is a new revolution that is unseen before, and all we can do is wait and see what the result is. But I think it's going to be one of hopefully great education, right, for those that listen.
Yeah. I mean, I think it comes down to education. I think it comes down to charity, and once not only knowing what is right, but like figuring out how to implement it right. You can't throw everything at people all at once. You overwhelm them, you're giving them away. But you do need to be firm in what you're talking about. And I think it's just balance of like, this is the thing I kind of everything kind of comes down to when I think of the church locally, and like do we want to be a really small church of super faithful people, but there's only a couple people around? Do we want to be a really big church, but we're kind of all over the place and we're probably not doing things right, but hey, we got a lot of people in the pews, and we got all the bills paid? But what's that like moderation for, like, we're charitably telling something this, like they need to know this, but like the back of our mind, we're like, they may not like what you have to say, and like they just they may just leave at that point, and like just kind of like knowing what is in your control of terms of like, I'm telling them what's right. You can only control so much of how they take it, in terms of like if something they really think is that important, you're telling them that it's something that they really like to do, and for some reason that's just so big to them they can't like make amends with it, that they have to leave. Maybe that's something that's out of your control, and then maybe the community at large is better off with them leaving, hopefully maybe for a time, and they find their way back another way. But I think it's the biggest like struggle. How do you purify the church without like destroying it?
Well, I was gonna say, Pope, paraphrasing Pope Benedict XVI, late, that he said the church has to become smaller, or will become smaller, but stronger. Right.
And holier. He said that as a cardinal.
Right. Okay.
70s.
So Cardinal Ratzinger.
Yeah.
And I think that may be the solution. Maybe we do have to lose people. To focus on the small amount that we have, so that we can then expand. But What are your thoughts?
Yeah, just to play on that too, that we at least shouldn't be afraid of that being a possible outcome of purifying things. Like, yeah, we need to do it in a time-friendly manner. Like, we don't have to dump the change on people, like, instantaneous, overnight. Some things we have to do that with. Something like we have to be impatient with sin. Of course, we can't, whatever. But, yeah, there's...
prudence.
Yeah. Right. So we should...
But aren't you judgmental if you're calling out someone's sin?
Why don't we ask AI?
What?
Hey, come on, man. We're living in the 21st century.
It's true.
So what are we going to do?
Is this really even us?
What are we going to do when we have AI walking down the aisles, collecting our money?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, he's getting a little Twilight Zone on us.
Cringe or not? Hey.
Well, it is. Yeah, it
Well,
could be.
people are already doing it electronically in most places anyway.
Exactly.
Well, we are adding layer upon layer at this point, so just to ground ourselves again, right? Because I brought up, Dennis asked me an important question about what's going on in the traditional West, and then we moved on to how do we work on ourselves. But I'd like to finish unpacking that as well, like. Maybe, Francis or Brady, since you have less experience in the Latin Mass community than Dennis and I have, I don't know if you have any reaction to that in terms of...
The reaction is that, like, what's crazy to me when I first got told about the Latin Mass, that it was still around, like if you would have told me this 5 years ago, or you tell most people out there in, like, the Catholic world, even people who go to Mass every week, that they're involved in their parish ministry, you tell them the Mass is going on, they're like, oh, the Latin Mass, there's some people who still go, it's just some old people who, that's all they've done, they'll, eventually they'll pass on, this is not a big, like, they don't even see it as, like the stuff you're talking about, like, to them doesn't even sound Catholic. Like, you might as well be talking about some, like, so super Southern Baptist, like, crazy right-winged, like, thing you're talking about. Like, you're talking about some reality show that you would see on, TV or whatever, these crazy people who, live this alternative, like, they live outside the world.
Right.
So, like, the fact that, like, the church's problems, they almost exist on, like, the two ends of the spectrum. You have, like, issues like I hate to use the American political spectrum, but you have issues on the left, you have issues on the right, and they're like, there's people who don't even know that, like, the people over here don't even know they exist, let alone there's people over here that don't even know they exist.
In the middle.
Which is like, and it's crazy how you attack you're like,
right.
You have like several problems upon problems. You have like two extreme over here, you have two extreme over here, you have people in the middle who don't even know what's going on, and it's like hard to figure out how do we even attack this.
Well, no, that's an interesting thing that you brought up. There's a lot to say, but one thing that I thought of was Jason Everett, the famous Catholic chastity speaker.
Yeah,
very good. I think him and his wife, or I'm sorry, him and I don't know, they're just married or about to get married, but Christina Everett now.
Yeah, they're married.
Well, no, I know that.
At the time.
At the time of this happening, where he said that he was asked to go on a show to talk about how they waited till marriage, right? Or were waiting until marriage to have sex. And so they're, oh yeah, sure, we'll go on the show. We'll have the interview, and they did. And so that when they were watching the show, and the show came out. The next episode was, now you're going to see this crazy household that thinks a dragon lives on their roof.
What?
Yeah, so they're
being like compared to like
yeah, and they had no idea.
That kills me, man, because okay, you know what? This is cringe. We actually, part of being a traditional Catholic is usually you have a big family. And by the way, that's a really, really good thing. And it's and this is why it's like people that typically struggle with kids making noises in Mass, or people that have never done it themselves. It's like, hey, let's remember the fact that traditionally, and I mean this in a good sense, the Catholic Church has always taught you're either called to the religious life or you're called to get married and have kids as able. And therefore, like, we're all supposed to be dying to self in some way, shape, or form. We're supposed to be experiencing that because that's part of what makes you a saint. So the idea of dunking on larger families, which is the cringe thing that I'm pointing out right now, is really, really concerning, because we have a lot of friends that have 7 children or more. And whenever you bring that up in most circles, the immediate thing is, oh, what are they going to be the next reality show? Like that's how the culture writ large responds
Wow.
to that. They're like, oh, they're going to be like the ones that
Not
had-
even seen as Catholic.
The Duggars.
That's what I was kind of
what
alluding
we
to.
hear.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and we get it too. Like I say, we're open to life, right? That's
Yeah.
part of being pro-life, part of being Catholic. And they're like, what are you gonna become, the Duggars or whatever? And it kind of turns into a sport, right? Because part of being pro-life and being confident, I feel like you need to be like prepared for that supermarket encounter that's inevitably gonna come.
1 Peter 3:15.
And
right?
flip it around on them. Give them a reason for your hope, but also hold the mirror up to help them realize how much of an idiot they are. Like, you know, that they're behaving as anyways.
Yeah, I mean, I've told that to people too. Like, oh yeah, we're open to life, and they're like, okay, yeah, but I mean, how many are you gonna have? I'm like, well,
It's
God,
Yeah.
God wants. Like,
Yeah,
I mean,
you know.
well, what about if you have 7? I'm like, oh, well, I mean, but obviously, people, like you said, Francis, I think you said it best, right? People don't even know that we exist. Like on this street alone, I'm sure there's people that have no idea that, we're living out a lifestyle that's radically different, right, from their own.
I was told once that they thought I was traditional, and I don't even go to Latin Mass, and I'm like, I literally had to like step back, like I don't even like go with this. Like I'm like, there's a whole other segment that would be considered traditional. Like there's like a whole other, like you think I'm on the far right, like. You don't even know
it makes me think of
there.
Sedevacantists. That like now there's Benevacantists, or at least there was up until Benedict died, right?
Yeah,
and
people really had to choose a camp.
right, right. But it's like it goes
God
back.
rest his soul, by the way.
Amen.
Yeah.
It goes back and back and back. Like you may be Sedevacantist that thinks John Paul II was the last true pope. Oh no, it goes back to Paul VI or Pius XII, and it goes all the way back to the Middle Ages. Even there was some back then. Sure. Because
Pope Michael just passed away.
Right. No, that was, and he was ordained, quote unquote, by Sedevacantists.
Yeah. Very strong air quotes, Pope Michael.
Air quotes, yes.
Oh, the one
Yes.
in Kansas?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think they elected a successor now. So.
Oh well, there you go.
Yeah.
So, yeah. No, I appreciate what you said. One thing I want to say just to close the loop on that one is, and this is, again, going back to solution providing, which, by the way, I think is what differentiates this episode from, it's what inoculates us from the danger of cringiness, from the germ, if you will. And this is just some pastoral advice for anybody that's, either in the rad trad community or that knows someone that's struggling with this. It's okay. I would agree with you until the cows come home that the Latin Mass has a level of beauty that is not there in the Novus Ordo, right? It's just distinctly very different in so many different ways. And it's one reason that I prefer it.
Like reverence, for one.
Of course. And another reason I prefer it, too, is just for my own prayer life, right? The Latin Mass is much quieter on the part of the laity, which allows for level 2 of prayer, which is the doorway to the upper 7, right? And then eternal beatitude can begin in this life. Whereas in the Novus Ordo, it's loud. There's a lot of back and forth and talking and responsorials. I'm not saying it's bad. Obviously, level 1, vocal prayer, is also prayer, which is good. But it's not level 2 of prayer, right? So that's me saying why I love the Latin Mass. But here's the pastoral advice for the rad trads. It's like, okay, it is definitely on the books that there are Eucharistic miracles that have been verified. That host became bloody. And it was
just here in Buffalo a few months ago.
Well, it never got confirmed.
Well, no, I mean the exhibit was here. I forget who was the.
Oh, I see.
Oh.
Yeah,
there was an exhibit here.
Something
From the
different.
one in Argentina?
Was in Argentina. The one that
1999?
the one.
Buenos Aires, right?
Yeah, there was the young man who came up with it. He would die. He had a disease and he died early, but during his life he had I think he compiled all these, and so he came up with an exhibit that.
the Carlo Acutis.
Yes.
Ah,
yes.
okay.
Yeah.
Sure. So, right, we have multiple instances of church verified Eucharistic miracles that were confected in the Novus Ordo rite. Okay, that's Jesus.
Period.
And also energumen, which is the term for those who suffer with diabolic possession, have been liberated by being given the Eucharist, confected in the Novus Ordo.
And here's the argument my Sedevacantist friends have given. oh well, Satan can perform miracles or quote unquote miracles, and then you want to question them. Well, where does it end? Fatima? How do you know that wasn't Satan? I mean, come on. There's nowhere. And then you go back to the Jews. It's like, well, the Jews called Christ, right? What they called him a worker of magic, right? From hell. I don't want to say the demon's name.
When you do it demonstrably, it's not giving them glory. But in any event, otherwise you couldn't read the scripture.
Right. Well, it's just a personal thing. I don't like to give the name, but yeah. So you can go all the way back to Christ, and then you're going to start doubting Christ, right? So there has to be a level of reason here. I mean, the fact is, if you just don't believe it, as St. Augustine, I think St. Augustine said, right, about those who believe, right, you don't have to give an explanation, but those who don't believe, no explanation's possible, right? I think it was St. Augustine. Anyway.
Well, I thought that was Aquinas.
Okay, well, he's probably...
he might have been quoting Augustine.
Well, I know he quoted Augustine.
Yeah, for those with faith, no explanation is necessary. For those without faith, no explanation is possible. Yeah.
Right, okay, so... Definitely Aquinas said it. So we'll just go ahead and state that, right? Even with all these Eucharistic miracles in the Novus Ordo rite, there's still people that are going to find a loophole, right, to doubt.
A perceived loophole, right?
Right, a perceived loophole.
They'll figure out something to say. They'll never come back.
And one last example would be, the calling into question the infallibility of canonizations now, right? Since Vatican II, you have people like Dr. Peter Kwasniewski is a big proponent of this. They find some line in some church document that came out and say, see, this is the hinge upon which it shows that we can call the infallibility of canonizations into question now. And it's like, at what point do you take that to its logical conclusion and just say, well, the gates of hell have prevailed then? Like, if canonizations were infallible for all of church history and now they're not anymore, it's like, are we at the end? Like, and it's sad. And then, of course, you can bring another like traditionalist like Taylor Marshall, who on his own blog says, yes, canonizations are absolutely infallible.
Right.
So you always get like this. It gets confusing when you don't allow for the magisterium to be the objective measure of Christ's teaching office, which is exactly what the magisterium is. It comes from Latin magister, teaching, right? So once you are out of balance, you
just end up you're just doing your own thing at that
it
point.
goes ad absurdum, ad infinitum.
Right. And I guess even Satan must be confused because Satan is still steal the Eucharist from Novus Ordo masses, right?
Well, there's that too.
Yeah.
I guess my just summary, just to my take on the form of the Mass and cringe and things, is that I came into the Catholic faith. I was a Christian my whole life, but I came into the Catholic faith when I was 20, in 2014. And at first I was like, oh, this is great. And I was very lots of intellectual things, and I was reading church fathers and stuff. But then maybe 2 years into being Catholic, I had a friend who introduced me to, he said, read Vatican II's Sacrosanctum Concilium, which is the document about the liturgy. And I read it, and it just destroyed my brain, because I was like, okay, I'm only 2 years into being Catholic and going to Mass for 2 years, maybe going to Mass for 3 years, but as a Catholic for 2 years. And I was like, almost none of this that is like the thing that was supposed to be the thing to rejuvenate the liturgy, we're not doing it. So I think my biggest thing, just kind of sidestepping the Latin Mass or Novus Ordo thing, is just if we would just implement Vatican II, because even Cardinal Arins, who used to be the artist formerly known as the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, now the Dicastery for the Doctrine of Faith or something, something like that.
Yep.
Yeah. Cardinal Renze or Arins?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So he said something about how we've barely scratched the surface of implementing Sacrosanctum Concilium, because there's just things that we've done the complete opposite of, or the Novus Ordo itself isn't, I don't think, the issue. It's just the way that it's been done and the things that have been pumped into it that are foreign to what was called for initially. And then priests and bishops who are a little bit undiscerning about it will say, well, that's the implementation. Like, the implementation that has happened is the implementation that was supposed to happen. It's like, it doesn't follow. It doesn't follow what was said. And,
Right.
and like we have examples of there are churches, and I don't think there's any around here. And unfortunately, they have the title, like the quasi title of Reverend Novus Ordos. Not to say that that Novus Ordos can't be done reverently. Like,
Across the
aren't
board.
necessarily being done
If
across
you
the
follow
board.
the rubrics.
Right. So, but there's these Reverend Novus Ordos. There's one in Steubenville. There's one downtown where they follow the rubric, like everything that was called for. Like
In Vatican II.
it falls into line. Like they even do mass
Ad
ad
orientem.
orientem, but it's in the vernacular. It's very silent, very meditative.
Some Latin, I think, right?
They'll incorporate a little bit of Latin, but like for the parts that are repeated, so people can reasonably be expected to be able to,
Participate.
learn them and participate. Like, and it's beautiful, and it definitely has a very similar, much more similar at least, feel to the Latin Mass. Like, yes, it's missing certain bits that have been kind of taken out, but it's way better anyway. So I think just
How much different is that from your average Novus Ordo Mass?
Good question.
Forget about like the cringy stuff, but just like your average Novus Ordo Mass where people are there for the right, most people are there for the right reasons. How different is that from what you're describing?
as far as like the particulars of what would be
Like
happening
I
at
just went to regular Novus Ordo and now I'm going that Mass. How different is that going to be?
It's going to be a lot more Gregorian chant. There's going to be a lot. Well,
Am I going to recognize?
It's going to look
still?
like a Latin Mass.
It's going to look. Yeah, it's basically like. I mean, really, the Novus Ordo, apart from the things that were taken out, it's just a translated Latin Mass, and we even the recent retranslations of things like "Lord be with you" and "also with you" was a horrible translation of "et cum spiritu tuo," and cum with spiritu spirit tuo, your, and with your spirit, and then we said and also with you. Like who was in charge of that? Like,
you brought up
I remember when they changed that and people were freaking out over that.
yeah, it's because they
Shows
don't
you how
They
hard
che-
it is for us to accept all these changes.
Right,
Even
yeah.
Benedict XVI said that of the Novus Ordo that it's a banal on the spot product.
Yeah, it was like the first.
Where did that come from?
Yeah, he said it was like the first time that we have just like scientifically put together a mass,
Oh.
kind of like before, like the
No, yeah.
And this is where I think the traditionalists have a point where they say, it's supposed to be saints and saintly people that are at the helm, the levers of any sort of liturgical change, right? But I guess now that Paul VI is sainted, they could say, well, see, Novus Ordo, right?
Yeah, right.
And if Benedict XVI, everybody, many who love him say he'll become a doctor of the church someday because he was so learned. And I think that's one of the reasons why you get a Dr. Kwasniewski who's like, no, we have to call into question the infallibility of canonizations now.
Because it's challenging.
Because otherwise,
their-
they're the whole. Because a lot of times you want a systematic theology because God is cohesive, and there is a system to this whole thing, but it gets really strange when you try to like put all those pieces of the puzzle together when all of a sudden there's a glitch in the matrix. I'll give you another perfect example, and this actually had a lot to do with where my heart was when it came to my fiat for co-founding East West Theology with you. It's the fact that, and you know this very well, we've talked about this numerous times, that when I was in, similar to Brady, actually, I had my adult conversion in 2014. I mean, I know that's the way I've described my testimony for a long time, but it goes much deeper than that. And if it's God's will that it gets publicly revealed someday, it will be. But there was always a deep connection to God and spirituality leading up to this point. But Catholicism started to make sense, but I also actually got introduced to Sedevacantism without knowing it at the time.
From Vatican Catholic.
Yeah, Diamond. And I've never publicly revealed that before, but that in some ways, not always, got me on the path of getting to the Latin Mass. I mean, one of the biggest things was an alleged apparition or private revelation that came out of an exorcism that I read talking about the importance of the Latin Mass. But in any event, that's neither here nor there. The point is I entered into that world and I had to rationalize myself similar to how you read this document and your whole world got destroyed. It's like I had to wrestle with trying to square a circle so many times over, basically, because you come into the community and many people with many varying levels of education, have very strong beliefs. That's one of the things that's a challenge too. It's like when you get like sheep, like we're all sheep, and God didn't call us sheep to compliment us. Like we're all dumb, right? Like we are really dumb post-fall. Even Adam and Eve, before the fall, they were just lesser than the angels. And the lowest angel is strong enough to destroy a planet. Like, and then now we're dumb, comparatively speaking. That's part of the effect of the fall. But you get these sheep that think they've got it all figured out. It's like a very challenging thing to deal with. And you know what I mean? And they say like, this is the way forward, because the Novus Ordo, they tried to take the true tradition away from us. And this is the only way forward, right? This is what so many believe. This was the glitch in the matrix for me. Right? Part of the culture of being there is you have, the approved texts within our own quasi-magisterium, and one of them is the Latin Mass magazine, and which, by the way, is objectively tremendous by and large, but like any and all apostolate, including this one, right? We are not infallible, right? It's why I think one of the things to prevent cringiness is not to take yourself too seriously. It's one reason why we're laughing and being jovial with all of this, right? But so I cracked open a Latin Mass magazine, and there was this like 2 to 3 page entry, which is a lot for that format, basically bashing Eastern Catholics, stating that they are disobedient on their faces because they allow priests to be married. And they said basically the headline was saying that this is no mere discipline. This actually is at the level of doctrine. And then they stated their case. They quoted a bunch of documents going back to the 600s and maybe prior. And I mean, this was 2015 or so when I read this. And so I'm going deep on memory right now. But it basically, like at the time, I was like, oh, well, I guess all of the Easterns are just like, terrible people because we Latiners, have it all figured out. And this is the right way to be Catholic. That's what you get from stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And you have to be able to know the principles to adhere to in order to be able to reason your way out of a trap like that.
Yeah, and the other end of the spectrum are the like the Russian Orthodox, I believe. We'll just say Orthodox for now. They're the opposite. They force all their priests to be married.
Oh, really?
And because going back to Photius, I believe, who was the one challenging the Catholic Church's position when during the Lateran councils that priests should be mandatory celibate, right? That he said it was a work of the devil to make celibacy mandatory. And so then you got the other end of the spectrum looking at the West saying, now look what you're dealing with: scandal, sex abuse, homosexuals in the seminary and the priesthood. Now look who's right.
Right. They try to say if priests were only married, you wouldn't have all these issues. It's like, well, look at St. Bridget of Sweden, right? It's either book 7, chapter 10 or book 10, chapter 7, but either way. It's
So the harmony is in the middle, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to have that plurality, right? I think we should preserve the tradition in the West, and we should preserve certain traditions in the East to have that plurality, right? That's spoken of throughout church documents. But it's like, how do you square the circle of if you're like everything that's in the Latin Mass magazine is approved and it's safe and it's what we really believe as Catholics, and then you run into a landmine like that, and you don't have a level of advanced theological training to work your way out of that, perhaps. You're going to go your entire life being suspicious of your fellow Catholics. And then you're in danger of that horizontal component of the schism. Right? Cringe.
Hashtag. Hashtag.
Did you ever, as a life... Oh, go ahead.
I was going to go just a little bit off, but you mentioned earlier about like beauty. And I think it's another one, moderation. Is there going to be a moderation between this building, this church is beautiful, but there's no one that really goes there. It really can't be financially supported, but we're going to put in all this effort to like keep the building open, even though as a church as a whole, it's probably not prudent to keep it open. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Or
like St. Anne's on the west or on the east side?
Yeah. Or do we say we go go the other way and say we start ranking these churches based on how beautiful they are? We get rid of the ugly buildings and make people go to the beautiful ones.
I think it's a little bit of both of those things. Like, I think that we should,
Interesting.
like, if we have, I don't know, like a family of parishes and a lot of, like, the financial situation's bad and they're going to have to close something or something, like, hypothetically speaking, I would hope that, like, the beauty of the church would be one of, like, if you've got a brutalist concrete bunker church over here, which we have plenty of in this diocese, and
Don't.
Pantheons too.
yeah. And then on the other hand, you have like beautiful, I don't know, a beautiful church, a church.
Basilica?
Yeah, basilica. You got a basilica on the
Lady
other
of
hand.
Victory.
I would hope that you would push people toward the basilica if it wasn't, you know, and there's all the other factors of like how far away do people have to go, so you need to spread things out.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I think preserving the buildings is good, but I mean, obviously you can't.
Well, you could almost argue in a lot of cases it feels like some more modern places, less beautiful, are financially or just by sheer number of people are more active parishes, and it's kind of like a weird thought to have. I mean, I think it would be cool. I think it would be interesting. It would be too tough just to like say to those people, what you have is nice, but you need to start going to those beautiful parishes. Like, get in your cars, let's go, people. Like, come on.
I would hope that, like, if there was, like, if they kept growing and, like, they needed to build a new church, I'd hope there'd be people in place to be like, let's build something a little different this time. Like, but, yeah, I don't know. Are you thinking, like, I'm thinking, like, you're making me think of the North Towns a little bit.
Like the North Towns,
Yeah.
there, I mean, we talked about this in our episode. You know, there was, you know, we had the White Flight and, you know, the 50s, 60s, they started building because there was all this, you know, people kept leaving for the North Towns. They built all these parishes real quickly there. They're maybe even a little more modern looking, and they kind of left the churches that you see in the city that are older, maybe, I think objectively you can say a little more beautiful. And then you're starting to see as time goes on, the churches in the North Towns and even in the South Towns a little bit that are a little bit younger are thriving in terms of their, you know, money and people there, where the churches in the city are, you know, are really, you know, in some cases hanging on by a thread. And it's just like, you know, like in one sense, it would make sense, like you close the churches where the people aren't and, you know, you consolidate to the places where they are. And in another sense, you can be like, yeah, but this is the more beautiful church and we should be appreciating that beauty, and maybe like, you know, maybe the people shouldn't be over by this church that's near their house. Like they should sacrifice their time and energy to like, to go a little farther and attend this like more beautiful church. But I don't know, like,
Well, no, they've been doing that at Corpus Christi, right? That happened during COVID, I believe. Where
well, yeah, and that
the
was
transition happened.
I think you know, with COVID and the way that it was kind of handled there, brought some people back there. But I just think on like a bigger level, I am just like, you know, I don't think and the other problem is just geography standpoint is people don't like going to certain neighborhoods, and you know, mean, there's also the drive factor. There's the way the neighborhoods are. They don't like being there. People think they're unsafe.
I've got something to further complicate all of this, and maybe we can bring it full circle here, and to universalize the conversation for anybody that might be listening and beyond our diocese. This kind of opened my eyes wide in a recent semester for my theology master's. A professor made the point that there was a concern within the Steubenville area, because as you've mentioned, I think on one of East West episodes, how there's like 3 different dioceses all within a very close section. So you have a lot going on in terms of like
people moving around.
Well, just the bureaucracy of like the culture, right? You've got 3 different bishops within an extremely short period.
Right, connecting at the Ohio River there. You got Steubenville, you have Weirton, West Virginia, and then you have Western Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh Diocese.
All there.
All within 15 minutes, right? 20 minutes.
So here's what the professor pointed out, right? And so first of all, because we're trying to talk about, okay, these are issues, but what are some potential solutions, right? So the issue might be the laity in general are going to want to go to a given parish, whether or not it has, you know, we can keep money in the equation or not, right? People want to go where the beauty is, where the reverence is, where the resources are, finances. And if you think of, well, I can just drive down to this church down the road now, because I prefer it as your solution, which is what a lot of laity do now, right? Roman Catholics. And we talk about how back in the day you weren't allowed to do that because it was actually part of church law to go to the nearest church to your house. This is what the professor pointed out. Not only is the church within her right, the leaders, the magisterium, the bishops, to reinforce that again at a moment's notice, right? Imagine this, like for traditional Latin Mass people. Instead of being able to go to that one church, the bishops are within their right, actually, to make it back into a law that's binding on us. To say you have to go to this church or you have to go to that church. And the example they gave was there were some problems with there being so many dioceses close to each other, where the local bishop at one point, like, because people were going elsewhere and the financial resources were depleting, and they had to do that. That actually happened in that area, where they said you must go within your own diocese. And this is binding on all Catholics. It's one of those, as long as it's been conveyed to everybody, you're expected to adhere to it. Once you know about it, it's binding.
But what's the consequence of I'm in
I think they said excommunication.
Wow.
That's what the professor said. It was excommunication not to obey the bishop.
In Diocese A and you decide I want to go to Diocese B, wouldn't the Diocese B bishop have to enforce that though? Like, what if he's like, oh, I'll take the extra?
It's one thing if you're visiting or something, but to go with regularity. So my point is,
but how do you keep that? What if the diocese? Let's say you're in Diocese A and you go to Diocese B. If the bishop of Diocese B doesn't want to enforce that, what's to stop it from happening? He's like, oh, I'll just take the extra people.
Listen, that's beyond my pay grade. But for the purposes of what it impacts us as laity, the point that I want to make right now is that you can't just rely on, oh, well, I'll go to that other parish that's more reverent as your end-all, be-all solution on an individual level, which should inspire us to recognize you need to be a part of the culture. You need to let your voice be heard. You need to be able to have a charitable dialogue with your pastor and whoever has, influence in the life of the parish, and make sure that you're working together to get to where you need to be. If there's some sort of a liturgical abuse or whatever the thing might be that's going on, if you got people that have this false notion that if you're going to a Novus Ordo, it's an objective source of evil, as the SSPX states, that is doctrinally untenable, right? Just as this idea, don't ever criticize anybody to the right? No enemies to the right of your flank. That's where a lot of people believe. They're like, hey, listen, as long as they're somewhat aligned with us, don't ever talk about it, because strength in numbers, that's doctrinally untenable. That's not how Catholicism really works. What works is we need to adhere to our dogmas, our doctrines, and then also in Obiscum Religiosum adhere to the disciplines of the time, and just be obedient across the board, and make sure that wherever we are supposed to go is providing that kind of a culture. Thoughts?
You made me think of how Christine and I have, we didn't actually take a vow, but we have a mindset of a vow of stability, like kind of how certain monks take, where they're like, I'm not just vowing to this order, but I'm vowing to this place. Like no matter what abbot comes in or what particular struggles happen, we're going to be here. So we came back to Western New York after being in Steubenville for a while. And we were like, okay, now that we're back, we just hunkered down in the parish Christine grew up in here, and we were like, okay, the goal is we're just gonna stay there until we die. And so no matter we've had 3 different pastors already, and all with different personalities and particular things that they focus on or don't focus on, but I really think that part of fighting cringe is you gotta get involved. You gotta be a parishioner. We can't bounce around. We can't just be like, well, I'll go to this parish this week and this parish that week, or this one gives me some. I mean, not to say that you can't. I like to go to a Latin Mass every once in a while or an Eastern Mass every once in a while, but the place where I do my ministry or I'm working on, I'm such an introvert that I can't. It takes me a long time to get to know people, so I'm I gotta push myself out of my comfort zone, learn this person's name. I just met someone today, and at my church who I'd seen her before, I'd never talked to her, just introduced myself today. So great, and getting involved with what my pastor is doing and getting involved with the road to renewal and stuff. But the thing is, like, it hurts, and I think that it's frightening to be a part of that, because then you start to see where people care or don't care, or where willingness is, or where obedience or disobedience lies, and it's like, well, this is my family. Like, this is.
It's your
but it's
family.
like, I'm not gonna run away. I'm not gonna go to another place unless, like, they kick me out or
Well,
the parish dissolves.
We should have a conversation though. At like, what point do you have to leave your own sanctity? Like, how far is like too far? Like, I
was actually going to touch on that. If you're one of those families, they're not the majority, but that are very close to the Holy Family in the sense that you endure death threats throughout your entire life. Extraordinary circumstance. You might have to be a little bit more mobile, right? Think of St. Louis de Montfort. St. Louis de Montfort was actually kicked out of diocese after diocese, and he's a saint. Mm-hmm. So obviously,
diocese, yeah,
he had to go to
Not just
multiple
parishes?
dioceses because of conflicts with evil bishops.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Even back then.
Well, I mean, every generation.
Yeah, I'm just-
Judas was in the church from the beginning. Yeah.
Just throwing it out there for traditional Catholics. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So,
Everything's better before Vatican II, they say, so.
right. This is why we have the virtues, the sub-virtues of prudence, right? You have synesis and nome, right? You know, you have like the principles that you adhere under normal circumstances, but then you also have the higher precepts to adhere to that apply more universally when the normal laws or the normal prescriptions just gridlock to the point that they don't work anymore. So, but again, part of having the authority to be able to operate on that level presupposes the knowledge and the appropriate applicability and the will.
Right. And I think that it's very admirable what you and Christina are doing.
Absolutely.
Right? And in the East, it's actually still part of canon law. You have to go to your parish at least most of the time. Right. And I think my pastor said at least once or twice a month you have to be at your parish, unless there's a good reason.
Now, what if you're just not like registered? What if you're just like
a
you're
Roman
you turned
Catholic?
18 and you're like, I don't know what I want to, like, I'll keep going to mass, but I'm going to church shop for like several years.
I think I can't say for sure, but maybe Kyle can speak. I think you're automatically then just incorporated into the parish that's closest to you geographically.
Okay.
I have nothing to add.
I mean, otherwise I can't speak on the matter.
No, I was just asking the Eastern.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, because you mentioned that like it was like you had to go there. So in the Eastern, is there what's the like, you know?
That's a great question. I mean, normally if you're brought up in the parish, you stay there until you leave.
Now, do you like when you become an adult, do you have to formally register, or is it kind of just like assumed?
I don't know, because I left to go to college and I came back as an adult, so I never really knew. But I think you're just assumed if it's that is my own personal theological hypothesis.
When I was a director of religious education, there were a couple times I had to call Eastern Catholic parish to get paperwork.
Oh,
and
really?
It was quite a time. It was like pulling teeth. It was. I got the attitude of like, why are you even asking me for this? Like, because it's just such a like they didn't worry about it.
Do they not keep track? Like I know, like
No,
in the
they
West,
do.
like
They do,
okay,
yeah.
like you put your envelope in the collection, and that's how they basically keep track of you.
Well, that and your, whether where were you married, right? Things like that, where you expect to be. But yes, definitely envelopes contributing to to right?
This wasn't around here too, so I don't know what.
It was not around here.
It was not around here. No.
Okay. What church? Not parish, but which church was it? As in ritual.
The right.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
I vaguely remember where it was, but I don't remember.
Was it like a Byzantine or
I
a
wanna say it was
Maronite?
Byzantine.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it was Byzantine.
Yeah.
I
Well,
can't
we are pretty serious about paperwork, so I don't know why.
There
At least
it
my
is.
parish was serious about it.
Maybe it's cringe.
I just got some today for being a godfather, so
It's a beautiful
for my nephew.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, brothers, we're kind of coming to time here, but maybe we'll end it on another quasi light one, right? Brady made a comment how I was a Christian my whole life and then I became Catholic. Has anyone ever been hit with are you Christian or Catholic?
Oh
I've
yeah,
been
many
asked if
times.
I believe in the Pope.
Wow. So are you a Pope splainer?
Well, in a similar vein of cringe, I do get a lot. So I have a lot of friends and family who used to be Catholic. Well, you can't stop being Catholic, but they're not
practicing.
Yeah. And it's funny when, like, especially at first when I was like, oh yeah, I've become Catholic, and, like, of my own free will, not just because I became Catholic before. Anyway, that's it. You can go watch episode. Which one?
5.
5. Go watch episode 5, and there's more story to
Nice
to that.
plug.
But
Yeah, very nice.
As we conclude,
it's
you're
so
smart.
It's so funny when, like, I would be like, I became Catholic, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh well, you know, I'm not Catholic anymore, because it's like I didn't ask about I mean, it's weird, like, conscience thing that happens with people where they're like they feel
I
they
don't
need
go
to
to church
justify
because
why they're no longer being Catholic, and it's like. Like, don't tell me why. Just go to mass. Go to confession. Do something.
Go.
Like, obviously, this bothers you that I've become Catholic and you're not doing this anymore. So
This is
it's
another
strange.
for another episode, another time. But as a survivor from age 7 to 30 of clerical abuse, I've had people try to explain to me why, because of what happened to me, they're no longer Catholic.
Wow. But you are.
Right. So
Makes zero sense. Yeah.
yeah, I still don't quite comprehend that one.
I said it before. That's just an excuse for them. They were looking for a way out.
Yep.
And that's what they chose.
I think so.
Could be the cat. I mean, there are a
can't
number
speak
of
for
people
them.
that I'm still close to today. So if any of them happen to be listening, I love you so much, and God be with you. So with that, I think I'm gonna kick it to the viewers and listeners. Right. Please comment below on any and all of the points that we brought up today. Get involved in the discussion. Let us know if there's any cringe topics we missed. I'm sure there's it's almost an endless list. But more importantly, I hope that we hope that you gain value from this conversation by being able to start to meditate more deeply on maybe how you can be part of the solution. We may or may not have given the best answers to all of the things here, but that's the whole point. It starts with trying. It starts with having the courage to even go there. But even before that, it starts with educating yourself with those principles so that you can draw the logical syllogisms to their conclusions as the best you can, and then sharpen your iron with your fellow brothers and sisters in Christ so that you can be involved. And if you happen to be in the Western New York region, feel free to get involved with Dynamis. That's how we all met and have really grown in our faith together. So, we're doing everything we can to practice what we preach, and you can absolutely get involved in that way as well. And then finally, whoever you thought was most interesting, go check out that episode next. On the Rich Dawn. We've got episode 5 with Brady Webb. We got episode 9 with Francis Boeck. And we got episode 12 and the East-West Theology channel with Dennis G. Any final words of wisdom, gentlemen?
I was gonna say, whoever you think it was the cringiest in this episode, you should put in the comments below.
unless you're a troll. We don't want you commenting.
In which case, we have mitigating factors for you. Pious censorship only as needed.
All right, just like X.
Indeed. Indeed. Francis?
No, that's it for me.
I love it, brother. So, and thank you so much for tuning in. Please like, share, help us out so that we can be a part of the solution in our region. And God bless.